has been physical. It has been intense. As most games between Indiana and Connecticut are. You can do this and stay in the game, at least tonight.
What a week for the WNBA, and unfortunately, not in a great way. I'm Tyler Springs. You're watching Many Ways to Win. And unfortunately, this week, we start with the topic we don't love to cover, which is fights. But I think it's important in this case because we're trying to set the record straight, at least from this one person's view. What was the Connecticut Sun Indiana Fever drama about earlier this week when those two met and there were a litany of fouls called and aggressive physical plays, and ultimately it ended up being a story because in the final minute of the game there was a huge scuffle between the two teams initiated on a flagrant foul. It's not about what people necessarily are going to spend time talking about for clickbait. It's not about Caitlin Clark. It is not about Jacy Sheldon necessarily either. And I think I can show you why and how it's not about those two women. It's about two other people that probably are getting a little bit less attention than those two because certainly at least for Clark, she takes the headlines, right? That's what everybody wants to talk about. And obviously, as well as I do that when the things that are being covered in your sport are either one particular player week in and week out or fights, physicality, drama. I'm not saying other leagues don't cover those things because they're juicy, right? They're gossipy. People like to see them. But I think the WNBA is still waiting on the coverage from major outlets where it expands beyond, those kind of flashpoint things, and it gets into, more nuanced play, things to be celebrated, rather than just sort of eye-popping things or things that one particular person does throughout a campaign. So it's disappointed the WNBA is being covered this way, but I understand why media is covering it this way up to this point. However, Tuesday night's game was made into something that it was not for Caitlin Clark. Uh, Unfortunately, this came down to one particular game, which included a concoction of factors that led to what you ultimately saw a lot of replays on. And I'm not going to show you the replay of the foul committed by Sophie Cunningham on Jacy Sheldon. I think you've probably seen that enough. You can find that other places. But what I will show you, I think will show you why this game was not defined by the Sheldon Clark interaction that, maybe allegedly spurred Cunningham's ultimate interaction with Sheldon near the end of the game. I don't think that's the case. I don't think A follows B in that case. And I'm going to tell you why. So you go back, you watch that Fever broadcast. Importantly, Kelsey Casper on the Fever broadcast reminds everybody that Sophie Cunningham, last time these two teams met, injured her ankle, for which she missed a couple of games, and chipped a tooth. And Jacy Sheldon was involved in a lot of the physicality from that original meeting, right? So that you bring in a little bit of a track record of, hey, I remember what this was like first time around. Okay, to say nothing of the way the game was officiated. And I think it is fair to say the officiating left a lot to be desired. You go back to the third quarter is when you initially see the Jacy Sheldon foul on Caitlin Clark that everybody's seen, right? Puts the hand up while she's defending her. Maybe that's her attempting a hand check. Either way, it flies up so high that it hits Clark in the face, right? And then you get Marina Mabrey coming in and decking Clark after the fact because Clark gave a shove to Sheldon afterward, and technical foul I think got called on Tina Charles as well for getting in Clark's face, and that was the initial issue, right? And I think the biggest issue in that play, honestly, is not even Sheldon. At least she is defending a player with the ball. It's Mabry who's coming in afterward and just laying the lumber on Clark. That is going to be a theme. So stay with us. Okay, you just saw the TV montage that the Fever TV crew created to lead into the fourth quarter. That did not include any fourth quarter action in that montage that began this particular broadcast. Okay. What I'm going to show you now is Sophie Cunningham merely in the fourth quarter and all of the physicality and the interaction that she were involved in. Okay. Try and stay with me on this one. Okay. You start here, right? Cunningham going to get entangled there with Haley Peters for the Connecticut Sun. And, I think she's making it look like Peters hooked her. And in fact, I think it was Cunningham who actually did more of the flailing, the play acting. Okay. There's gonna be almost 2 minutes of this, so stay with us, okay? A little while later on, right? Locked up one on one against Nia Rivers. Cunningham with a big swing of the arms. It was a foul on Rivers, in review, and Rivers may not have thought so. She did grab her on the wrist, but Cunningham with a big, wild swing of the arms to try and free space for herself, and the elbows became sharp there. You see the half court interaction there between Sheldon, who got caught up on the screen by Clark, and Sheldon probably protested a little too much there, but again, those two locked up again, and in physicality. Okay, now watch this. Sheldon, again, being screened by Cunningham, and eventually gets off it this time. Picks up Clark as she did for most of the game, and picks her up almost at 94 feet. Now, Cunningham comes back over trying to set another hard screen, gets away from Sheldon, goes to the baseline drive, draws the bump, and that's a foul on Sheldon. And at this point, Sheldon is beside herself. And I think the more you watch Sheldon throughout the end of this game, the more you felt like she just thinks she can't do anything right, in the eyes of the officials. But here, Clark hits a giant three over Sheldon, okay? She starts yelling at the bench for Connecticut, not at Sheldon, who was coming up floor to get the ball. She was yelling at the bench. She was yelling at somebody else entirely. So I don't think Clark has a problem with Sheldon, right? Now, all the starters are out of the game for the Fever at this point, okay? You saw the interaction there between Clark on the bench and her coach, and Sheldon with Colson there. Sheldon and Colson were friendly. They seemed to be fine. Then, possession later, that's Peters who gets rolled up on the back of the ankle that had been injured for Sophie Cunningham, right? That obviously smarts. And that is, I think, the genesis of what Cunningham did. She'd been fed up the entire night with the way the game was being officiated or not, and the physicality that was being allowed. And I think, in particular, um, having had that injury stoked a little bit right there by Peters rolling up on the back of her ankle, which does not feel great. Um, she goes after Sheldon because, in all honesty, all of the starters for the other team are for your team are out of the game. The game is 20 points apart. It is beyond decided. Nothing needs to happen. If you want to foul Sheldon and not let her have the layup, fine, foul her. But you don't have to go in there with two arms over and basically bear hug her and then try and get her in a headlock and all the melee that ensues. Okay. That's on Sophie Cunningham. And I think, unfortunately, this game was defined by three players that are incredibly hard to officiate, okay? You look at Mabry, who is first in the league in personal fouls per game. Clark is second. Cunningham has the highest foul rate of anybody in the league if you cut it off with a minimum of at least 20 minutes per game, right? The players that play the most. Two of the last three seasons that Cunningham played for Phoenix, she led that team in fouls per game, okay? So it's not as though we're just picking a couple of players who got entangled one night. Ooh, and this is rare for them. No, they are primarily centers of attention, and largely foul based in so many regards, night in and night out. This is what they do. This is who they are, and in part, it's because people want to stop Caitlin Clark, right? I think it would be probably true that people want to bring the physicality to her and her teams wherever she is. Fine, fair or unfair, whatever you want to think of that. But that's how you try and defend her and how you try and get her off her game, right? And you try and do it within the balance, and within the confines of the rules. Some will push that envelope for sure, and I'm sure Stephanie White would tell you that, and Clark and her teammates might tell you that. But she fouls as well. She's physical, which does not lend you to many friendly opponents on the other side. Mabry fouls a ton. Cunningham fouls a ton. These people are at the center of attention for a reason, okay? And a lot of it is their own doing. So they're always doing something, right? Whether that is everybody giving you their best shot to try and stop you, and it's Clark, and she responds to the physicality, or it's just Mabry and Cunningham being kind of wind up players. I think Mabry kind of rolled the stink bomb in there earlier in the game and then got out of the room and let everybody else kind of breathe it in and have to deal with the fumes of it late in the contest. I think honestly she got nowhere near the credit for kind of creating the unraveling at the end of this game as she could have. I actually kind of liked Jacy Sheldon in watching her play more and more after that foul on Clark because she continued to, at least from my view, concentrate and look like she was trying to play through what was a game her team was losing, B, a game in which she was playing poorly, and C, in game in which there was already a lot of energy in the atmosphere. And I think she was still trying to play and navigate through those circumstances in a way that was professional. That was just my view of it. So I think That was also the start of a tough stretch for them, and I think it was 3 games and 4 nights for the Sun they ended up playing, and she ended up, I think, playing. You could argue better and better as that road trip wore on, despite the flashpoint there in Game 1 of that road swing against the Fever. On the other side, Cunningham just ruins what should have been a celebratory night for the Fever, right? I mean, you should have had Clark and Stephanie White talking more about the Commissioner's Cup and their berth in that contest than you had, because the focus was on Cunningham and they hated it. They told you they hated it in the post game press conference. They didn't say it necessarily in so many words that we're mad at our teammate, but that's Cunningham undercutting the accomplishments of the team that should otherwise be celebrated. Because Cunningham essentially got mad that she got rolled up on and her ankle hurt and she couldn't contain herself. And I think Cunningham honestly has still quite a bit to prove. I mean, people have liked what she has brought to that smaller lineup. When she's in there, or Lexi Hull's in there, or they're both in there, and they're only playing Aaliyah Boston as the one true big and not Natasha Howard. Though Howard has been great. But I think she's still got a lot to prove. The defense this year, the numbers are not good there. I think they will be better. They have tended to be, a little bit better and closer to what wherever the team is defensively focused. She's been, I think, defensively fine, and we'll see how that lineup continues to play for the Fever. But she still has a lot to prove, and she's already done a lot to undercut her attempts to I would say be an effective player and a player that people can count on in the clutch, right? Maybe you don't want to say a 20-point game is the clutch, but in a lot of ways, you wonder whether or not there could have been suspensions there. Nobody ended up being suspended. There were a couple of upgrades and a couple of fines, but that there certainly, I think, was room to have officiated that differently. And the officiating is something we can talk about as the season goes forward. But I do think there are some officiating issues as well, and that's unfortunately what underpinned the nature of that game. But it was not about Caitlin Clark. It wasn't, and it's not about the league's overall dislike for Caitlin Clark. It's not about Clark's history with Jacy Sheldon. That was a game that to me was about Marina Mabry, who I dare say you could call Hakuna Marina, because she doesn't care about anything. Apparently, she'll go out there and she's had a rough week statistically, but she'll mix it up. And Cunningham, who stole the spotlight from what should have been a great and celebrated uh, Indiana Fever performance on a night that got marred by a lot of physicality and unfortunately one player decided just at the very end to ruin the whole thing. So that's the way I saw it. But I hope you uh, come and discuss. Feel free to disagree, give your viewpoints on my take, and let me know what you think. But looking forward to giving you more women's basketball coverage and general sports chatter. Whatever's interesting as we go along the way. I'm Tyler Springs. This has been Many Ways to Win.